Today we're going to do a deep dive into emotion regulation. First, we're going to talk about what emotion regulation is, then why we might struggle with it, and finally, how do we get better at it? Now, I don't know if you've watched this season of Love is Blind, but the dynamic between Lydia and Milton is a little distressing. He was always frustrated with her because she was quote unquote too emotional and was sharing that he just wasn't emotional like that. She kept saying that she was just an emotional person and that was healthy.
I feel a lot. I am loud. I am passionate. I'm emotional. And I want to stand by you to support you with any decision that you want to do. But I need you to understand me.
Their way of interacting with each other was incredibly frustrating to watch because being unable to emotionally regulate and being emotional are not the same thing. And being unable to express emotions is not because you're just not an emotional person. It's because you struggle with emotion regulation. An important thing to remember is that struggling with emotion regulation can look like, number one, under-regulating, where your emotions feel explosive, overwhelming, impossible not to act upon. Or, two, over-regulation, where we repress them and say things like, I'm just not an emotional person. And finally, number three could be a combination of the two. Some of us will go into this cycle of over-regulating, so we're stuffing them down, which makes our emotions get more intense and feel bigger because we're suppressing them. This is actually called amplification, if you want to look it up. So we're pushing them down, and then we experience under-regulation, and we explode, which can lead to us not being able to trust our emotions, so then we over-regulate again. We can go round and round and round. Do any of these sound familiar to you? Is there one that you find yourself doing most? If you still aren't sure, let's dig into what emotion regulation is. Emotion regulation refers to the processes that allow an individual to manage emotional arousal. Because of the dynamic nature of human emotional responding and the pervasive role it plays in all our experiences, emotion regulation skills are fundamental to everyday functioning. In short, emotion regulation is our ability to respond and regulate our emotions as we experience them. Instead of our emotions running us, we are able to recognize them and respond accordingly. We're able to respond, not just react. And stick around because I'm going to walk you through an emotion regulation quiz so that you can see how you're doing with it. But first, let's dig into the reasons that we could struggle with this. Now, a lot of things can cause trouble with emotion regulation. Brain structure, genetics, but one of the big ones is our early childhood experiences around emotions, which is why I talk about emotional neglect so often. Emotion regulation is such a huge part of being a healthy human with loving relationships, and experiencing childhood emotional neglect can make it really challenging to regulate healthily. We probably never had anyone show us how to do it by demonstrating it in their own life. And we may have not felt safe to express any emotions growing up, so we mostly tried to ignore them or suppress them. When we struggle with emotion regulation, it basically means we have deficits in our emotion regulation abilities. That makes sense, right? If we aren't able to do it, that's essentially not having these abilities, right? And we have created over time maladaptive emotion regulation strategies. So what does that all mean? Let's dig into it. Now, the first component that I talked about, when we struggle with emotion regulation abilities, right? We're not able to regulate. That means that we're going to have a hard time identifying or labeling emotions. If I stopped you on the street and asked you, hey, what are 3 things you felt today? I know that might be kind of weird, but you might not be able to tell me. It'd be overwhelming. You wouldn't know. We can also experience emotions more intensely because we've been suppressing them, probably, which can lead to avoidance or unhealthy emotional strategies, which I'm going to get into next, so hang tight. Then we also might have impulsivity or decision-making issues. This can result from an impulsive or risk-taking behavior, and we can have a difficult time considering the consequences of our actions, especially when we're experiencing a strong emotion. This can also mean that we have a difficult time managing stress. It can lead to heightened anxiety, feelings of being overwhelmed, and unhealthy coping skills such as avoidance, substance abuse, or even self-harm. We might have a hard time connecting because we tend to think of emotions as unpleasant, like the ones that we avoid are the unpleasant ones. But joy, happiness, and love are all emotions too. And when we struggle with emotions, it's going to include the good ones that help us connect to those around us. And finally, we might have a hard time getting or using support. We can be reluctant or struggle to seek support from others, or accessing appropriate resources, or engaging in therapeutic interventions aimed at improving our emotion regulation skills. We can feel like maybe it's best if we just isolate. And to ask for help could mean that something's wrong with us, and that can be difficult for us to acknowledge, right? Now, these are all skills we may not have learned or developed if our caregiver neglected us emotionally. And in the absence of these skills, we develop, moving on to that second component, right, maladaptive emotion regulation strategies, meaning that if I struggle with emotion regulation, I don't have the abilities. And that's what we just discussed. And then because I'm lacking those abilities, then I've created these maladaptive regulation strategies. With working with what I have, I came up with these things to try out. Now, these are ways to cope that are ultimately harmful or counterproductive in the long run. They, however, can often feel great in the short term. And when we struggle with these maladaptive emotion regulation strategies, that means that we can avoid our emotions altogether. We ignore them, we suppress them, or we deny our emotions rather than addressing them directly. This can lead to emotional buildup or numbness, increased stress. I'm sure you guessed this one, dissociation, and difficulties in identifying and expressing feelings appropriately. We can also avoid certain situations, like we avoid people or places or situations that are going to trigger any uncomfortable emotions. So instead of developing healthy coping mechanisms to navigate them effectively, we'd rather just not go. We can also participate in risk-taking behaviors, engaging in self-harm as a way to cope with the emotional pain we feel, or relieve tension, or even to exert control over an overwhelming feeling. Engaging in reckless or dangerous activities such as speeding, gambling, or unprotected sex to seek excitement. I've heard from a lot of you that sometimes we do some of these behaviors just to feel something, right? If we're so repressed, if we can't regulate and we just stuff it down, then we can go out into the world being like, I just want to feel something. And we can use other stuff as distractions or giving us any temporary relief from the emotional distress. We can also find ourselves in denial, refusing to acknowledge or accept the reality of a situation, emotions, or consequences, which can perpetuate the avoidance. We can feel a denial of personal responsibility, wanting to point the finger at everybody else. And it can hinder our problem solving as well as our emotional growth. We can also ruminate. We can have excessive and repetitive thinking about negative experiences we've had, leading to increased feelings of helplessness, hopelessness, and a magnification of our distress. We can also exhibit externalizing behaviors, and this happens when we express emotions through outwardly directed behaviors, such as anger, aggression, hostility, rather than addressing the underlying feelings, or the triggers, or the interpersonal conflicts. And finally, we can avoid personal responsibility by blaming others for our emotional experience, or our problems and conflicts, which unfortunately then can perpetuate the conflict. So let's say we find ourselves doing all of these things. We don't have the ability to regulate, and we also have these behaviors, these maladaptive behaviors that we're doing to try to keep them at bay. Well, then what do we do, right? Well, here are 3 tools that can help you better understand your emotional experience and respond, rather than react, to it. And my first tool is emotional awareness and acceptance. I know it's a big one. I'm going to break it down for you. Now, first we have to have present moment awareness of our thoughts, our feelings, sensations, and our surrounding environment, and here's the big piece of this, without judgment. Mindfulness techniques can help with this. These can be things like meditation, deep breathing exercises, and body scans. Those can all help us become more attuned to our emotions and respond to them with greater awareness and acceptance. There's this tool in DBT called the white light. So if you struggle to even get in touch with yourself, The white light is a good place to start. And it says to imagine this circle, this white circle of light, starting above your head and slowly making its way down all the way to your toes. And the goal is, as that light hits, let's say the tippy top of my head, what do I feel? Do I feel the warmth of it? How does that part of my body feel? And it just gives us an opportunity to kind of tap in slowly versus feeling like we have to jump in and we're like, I don't like being in my body. It feels really uncomfortable. This gives us an opportunity to do it slowly and steadily. Give that a try. Sometimes that white light can just help us tap in little by little so that we don't get overwhelmed. Developing the ability to recognize, label, and validate our emotions accurately is a really powerful tool. And this involves acknowledging a wide range of emotions without judgment. It's a key piece. Be curious, not judgmental. And understanding their underlying causes and triggers. This could mean we use the feelings wheel. Go to feelingswheel.com. It's great. We could also journal or try to list 5 emotions that we felt at the start and then again at the end of our days. Whatever you can do, let's just start there. Remember, this is often how we learn to deal with emotions as a child. So it's going to take us some time to get in touch with how we're feeling and not want to run away from it. Be patient and kind to yourself as you try this out. My second tool is cognitive strategies like reappraisal. Now, if that doesn't make sense, don't worry, we're going to break it down. But being able to challenge black and white thinking, right, to look for the gray, and to reinterpret patterns and behaviors that contribute to emotional dysregulation, which, remember, might be emotional distress, or it could be lack of emotion. This can be done by checking our facts, noticing our unhealthy patterns of behavior or unhelpful beliefs we have about ourselves and our world. So think about that, right? These cognitive strategies can help us kind of undo or challenge those old narratives we're acting out of, or to change those old beliefs that aren't serving us anymore. So we can check our facts, we can notice our unhealthy patterns of behavior, or any unhelpful beliefs that we have. Then we can reframe our thoughts or behaviors related to the situation. If this is still unclear, don't worry. I'm going to give you an example of it in just a minute. But my third tool is coming up with healthy coping behaviors. Engaging in activities and behaviors that promote relaxation, enjoyment, and well-being. These could be things like exercise, hobbies, creative expression, spending time in nature, or connecting with supportive others. And I have an entire video offering 24 coping skills. It's actually called 25 coping skills because the comments are then filled with tons more to give us that 25th. And I'll link it in the description, or you can just search Coping Skills Kati Morton on YouTube and you can find it. But let's try these out. We want to make sure they work for us. So try them out when you don't really need them, and then keep a list on you with about 5 of them that we know work at all times. You can keep it in the notes on your phone. And make sure that you also have some that you can do in the middle of the night too, because that tends to be when we have the toughest time. Okay, so now let's do a little emotion regulation quiz. And it's called the ERQ, the Emotion Regulation Questionnaire. And it's a 10-item scale designed to measure respondents, meaning you and me, our tendency to regulate our emotions in 2 different ways. Number 1 is called the cognitive reappraisal, and 2 is expressive suppression. Now, cognitive reappraisal, which we just talked about, is an adaptive emotion regulation strategy. It's about reframing experiences. For example, instead of saying, I failed the exam, it's the end of the world, I'm not good enough, we would reframe that into, I faced a challenging exam and it didn't go as planned. This is an opportunity to learn from my mistakes and improve my study habits and to grow academically. You can see how that feels different, right? That reframe doesn't feel as blamey or shamey. And expressive suppression is about trying to limit how much you show and attempting to control emotions so that they don't feel too big. An example of this would be to imagine someone receives disappointing news at work, but they're in a social gathering with friends. Instead of expressing their true feelings of frustration or disappointment, they suppress their emotions, put on a fake smile, pretending that everything is fine. They might respond with, oh, it's not that big of a deal, while internally feeling incredibly upset. In this scenario, the individual is using expressive suppression to mask their genuine emotions and maintain a more socially acceptable outward appearance. Now, there are two types of questions in the ERQ. One is going to be about your emotional experience and what you feel like inside. The other is about your emotional expression, or how you show your emotions in the way that you talk, gesture, or behave around others. For each of these items, you're going to have to answer between 1 and 7, okay? 1 is, I strongly disagree with this. No. And 7 is, I strongly agree. Yes, this feels right. There are 10 questions total, okay? So question number 1, remember between 1 and 7, do we agree or disagree with this? When I want to feel more positive emotions, such as joy or amusement, I change what I'm thinking about. Number 2, I keep my emotions to myself. Number 3, when I want to feel less negative emotions, such as sadness or anger, I change what I'm thinking about. Number 4, when I'm feeling positive emotions, I'm careful not to express them. Number 5, when I'm faced with a stressful situation, I make myself think about it in a way that helps me stay calm. Number 6, I control my emotions by not expressing them. Number 7, when I want to feel more positive emotion, I change the way I'm thinking about the situation. Number 8, I control my emotions by changing the way I think about the situation that I'm in. Number 9, when I'm feeling negative emotions, I make sure not to express them. And number 10, when I want to feel a less negative emotion, I change the way that I'm thinking about a situation. Now, to score it, please add your scores for your answers to 1, 3, 5, 7, 8, and 10. Okay, so we want to add those up on their own. Our answers to number 1, 3, 5, 7, 8, and 10. And then separately, add your scores for answers 2, 4, 6, and 9. That first number from 1, 3, 5, 7, 8, and 10 is your cognitive reappraisal score. And the second is your expressive suppression. So we want the first number to be really high and the second one to be really low. Now, if the second one is high, no need to feel shame or frustration. Emotion regulation is absolutely a thing that we can grow and develop in. And it's not something that you did wrong. It's honestly likely a result of the way that you interacted with your parents around emotions, or your family as a whole, right? Rewind the video back to those 3 strategies that I offered, and let's give those things a try. I know it's tough and it's going to take some trial and error, but remind yourself, you didn't learn this behavior in one try, or in one day, or one moment. It was learned over time. So be patient and kind with yourself as you try to respond to your emotions in a healthier way. Also, you can check out my other videos on childhood emotional neglect, or purchase my inner child workshop at katiemorton.com if you want to understand yourself more. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful week, and I will see you next time.